Amen. Thank you, Heidi. If you didn't know, Heidi's another one. We've got quite a few prayer warriors in the church, and Heidi is one of those, always praying, always meeting with other people and praying. And I'm so grateful for people like her who prayer is so important to life. And to have her praying for us and others like her is brilliant. And thank you, Brett, for being here today and talking on such an important subject. I'll be there at 12:30, and I encourage anyone who you can get anything out of this, I'd invite you to come along. I'm a grandparent. My kids are two of them are in their 30s now, and so I'm sort of looking at the next generation coming through, and there's so much we need to know that we can help them. So it's important. And thirdly, before I start, congratulations, Han. It's so good to hear that. I haven't been part of the process. I chatted at the beginning, but over the last few weeks and months, it's been behind closed doors, a really well thought out process. And I, like Jonathan, am looking forward to welcoming your first grey hairs in about 3 months' time. Look what happened to me. I've aged prematurely. But anyway, it'll be good. And I know that you will serve Northcross well. I know. I've seen you for the last 15 years and what you've been doing. So I know it'll be good. Now, while I'm still senior pastor, Han is one of those people that only likes 2 or 3 slides up here during a service. I like 7 or 8. Today I have 16. It's his worst nightmare. He comments on how many slides people use each week. Fewer is better. Well, today you're getting 16. This is a complex, complicated message. It's going to have lots of stuff, visuals, so you can follow it. The first 6 I'm not counting because they're introductory, and then we'll get into it because we've been away from Judges for the last 4 weeks. And so this morning I want to resume Judges and really get stuck into it. And you're going to hopefully see, part of what I do is not just, I don't want to just give you a few applications or a few shallow things to tell you. I want to go deeper. I want you to walk away knowing the Bible better, being able to study it for yourself, and being really the stories to stick for the rest of your lives. And so I'm hoping that will do it today. So I'm going to give you 2 reminders, and then we'll dive on into everything else. So first, the book of Judges is, as you know, if you've read it, a pretty dark book. There's some gruesome things happen in there. Some of the most gruesome things in the Bible happen in the book of Judges. However, I said this before and I'll say it again. The book of Judges, out of all the Old Testament books, is probably the most relevant to us today. The stories in there, so many of the things happening, so many of the things being done, echo what's going on today. We are seeing the similar sorts of things in and around the world today, and especially around Christians. And that's the second thing. The theme of the book of Judges is this. It's Canaanization. Canaanization. I want to remind you of that. It means that the people of God were becoming like the Canaanites. They weren't living as they should, and we'll talk about that quite a lot. But the theme of the book of Judges is the Canaanization of God's people. So turn in your Bibles, if you would, to Judges chapter 2. This is all still introduction, so I'm not counting this in my time. Judges 2, verse 10 to 15. This sort of sets up. There's several places in the first 2 or 3 chapters of the book that give you an idea of what's to come. And chapter 2 is pivotal in this. So chapter 2, and I'm not going to project this. I'm only going to project, otherwise if I'd projected all the text, we would have had about 30 slides. And Han would have he would have resigned probably and not even started. So we're just going to, I'm going to only put up the really relevant ones, and you can follow those as go. But this is introductory. After the whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, talking about Israel, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. They would have known it in theory, but they didn't know it in their hearts. Chapter 2, verse 11. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. They couldn't stop them flowing into the, and around through the borders of Israel. When Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. He had told them lots of times through the earlier books of the Bible that if they turn their backs on him, there are consequences. They were in great distress. So here's Israel. They've come in, they're settling the promised land. They beat all comers. No one could defeat them. God was with them. And they come in, and now they start settling down. And now they forget the Lord, and they start getting on, and they see the other people around them. They're well off, and they start joining in everything they're doing. And I guess the partying and the lifestyle, and they just like everyone else, and they blend into the surrounding culture. Now, what was meant to happen is God brought them to their own special place, said, this land is yours, land of milk and honey. I want you to take it over, and I want you to create a beautiful nation in which I am honored, I am worshipped, and you'll be a beacon to the whole world. You will have a testimony to the whole world that God is real, God is good, and He is the God. He is the God of salvation. He is the God to worship. So that's what I want you to do. But instead of that, they joined in the wickedness of their neighbors. Instead of honoring God, they started worshiping what their neighbors were worshiping, and idols. Our idols aren't the same. They aren't little metal or wood things, but ours are popularity, wealth, and all sorts of things. You can, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things. So they joined in with everyone else, and that's Canaanization. They became like the Canaanites. Well, what happened? The disobedience of God's people persisted, and it invited the discipline of God, as it does today. And they were disciplined by God. Suddenly, where they were victorious in all sorts of situations, their lives started falling apart. Instead of being, the God working in them and through them, as it were, things started going wrong in their lives, and wheels started coming off. They suddenly became helpless before their enemies, spiritually, materially, emotionally, physically, economically. Their lives fell apart. Everything just started going wrong. Christians, nail this from the beginning. God rules. And when we don't show him the honor he deserves, when we disobey him, our tomorrow is in his hands. Why would I want to disobey him, dishonor him, annoy him, make him angry? It's just not the smart thing to do. We're supposed to love him with all our hearts and love other people. But Israel, they had those scriptures, but they did not obey them. And as we learned last time, you come to the New Testament, and there is a text that speaks about this, about the New Testament form of Canaanization. And it's James 4:4. It says this. James is writing to these believers, and he says, you adulterous people, you're cheating on God. Don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity against God? Therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. Saying, guys, don't join in with those that are enemies of God. You're becoming like them. Don't do that. It infuriates God. So friendship with the world exists when you and I start putting God on the back burner and started getting into sins and things that we shouldn't do, whether it's pornography, whether it's other things. There's so many things out there and ready to drag us down, and we mustn't give in to them. So that's the title of this series. It's called Friendship with the World. The book of Judges is about friendship with the world. It's about God's people becoming worldly when they should have lived for God, stood up for God, but they sort of compromised and then got worse and worse, and as I said, the wheels fell off their lives. We don't want to be those people. So Israel sinned, and they suffered. But thankfully, as we're going to see, God is gracious, always gracious. Then the Lord raise up judges who save them out of the hands of the raiders. Are we able to get a screen at the back there so I can see what I'm on? Then the Lord raised up judges. Then the Lord raised up judges or deliverers. Remember, the word judges, it depends on context as to how you translate it. So in this context, it's not a judge that sits in a court. It's someone who saves, someone who leads, someone who delivers or rescues people. The book of Judges is misnamed, as I told you before. It should have been named probably better the book of saviors, the book of redeemers, the book of deliverers, the book of leaders, or something like that. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved Israel out of the hands of the raiders. So God put them in, they suffered the consequences of what they'd done. However, the Lord responds to their situation, sees what they're going through, takes pity on his people. He is full of grace and he rescues them. Now, this is an important point and something that we need to take away every time from this. Yes, God allows those things to happen, but God never gives up on his own. He never gives up on his own people. We can stoop low, we can go do all sorts of sins, but God, no matter how serious it gets, never lets go of his own. And he holds on to them and he responds to them. And this is what happens. He disciplines us. He allows us to experience the consequences, the negative consequences of our sin, but he never abandons his own people. Just lock that in. You know, when God seems to be silent, doesn't seem to be hearing your prayers, he has not abandoned you, but you may be suffering for something. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. So God raised up, we're told, judges, plural. He raised up judges, plural. Now I want to show you these judges. Beautiful. Here we go. Now there are 12 of those judges. And I want to show you. This is chronological. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, all the way through. So there's 12 of them and it's moving down like that. Now why did I put some in red and some in black? Because the red ones are sort of major saviors or judges, and the ones in black. In other words, it's about how much is written about them. If they're a minor judge, there's just a little bit written about them. If you're a major judge, and they're the ones we'll study, they're in black. So you've got these different ones that we study, and they all do, all sorts of crazy things, and some of their stories are just like, really powerful. Ehud, for example, is the left-handed assassin that leaves his sword in someone's stomach. If you want to read that story, that's one of the gruesome ones. Then you've got Shamgar, Barak, Deborah. I'm going to explain that because that's what we're studying today. Gideon, Tola, Jephthah. Barak, not Obama, different spelling. Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, not Musk, same spelling. Abdon, Samson. So we're going to study several of those over the next few weeks and finish out the year with this and then move into Christmas stuff. But so here we have these judges, and there's 12 of them. Why 12? Probably we're given 12 because there were 12 tribes of Israel. Not that each judge came from a particular tribe. They did, but they didn't come from all the different tribes. Some of them came from the same tribe. But the point is that God raised up 12 to probably say that all Israel has sinned. All Israel needs salvation. All of my people have gone astray, but I'm there for them and I'm going to bring them back with these judges and help them. Why did we need 12 judges? Why not just 2? Because Israel kept on sinning, kept on failing, kept on doing things wrong. It was a cycle. Always remember this. The book of Judges is about cyclical sin. It just keeps on coming around. Israel would sin. There would be consequences. They'd get worldly. Israel would be in the middle of those consequences and they'd be miserable. So they'd cry out to the Lord. The Lord would send judges and rescue them. They would have peace. Everything's going good. And as life's going well, then they start getting into the sin again. They turn on the computer again. They look at this again. They do this again. And slowly they slip back into their own ways. Then the sin brings consequences. The consequence, you get the idea, I won't go through it, but you could put it like this. It's a way I like to remember it. Sin led to suffering, led to prayer, crying out, or supplication, and God would come in, use the judges, and save them again. So it was just going like this, and it's a bit like our Christian lives sometimes. We manage to defeat a sin in our life, and then there we go, and we get into something else. And this was some serious sinning going on. So all that and all those slides were extra, setting things up. You won't gather that again next week. And so we're not counting that. We're just moving on. And we're talking today about Judge 4. And it's in the book of Judges, chapter 4. And technically, if you saw before, it was Barak. But we're going to also talk about Deborah, because I'll tell you what happens. We're going to see it. But Barak is the one who God calls, the one that God uses. He's the one who's the judge. But Deborah eclipses him. Deborah is the person of greater faith and the person that serves the Lord in a more obvious and a more faithful way. So let's move into it. We're going to be looking at that as the sort of idea. The story of Barak and Deborah takes up 2 chapters, 4 and 5. We're going to study 4 in some detail, and 5 we'll refer to near the end. Here we go. Judges 4, chapter 1. Again, relapse time. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Now that Ehud was dead. Wow. Another relapse. You notice what happens? It often works like this as well. They do well, and then the judge dies. Whoever was their hero, their leader at that time, the person they were looking to, as soon as they die, they start dropping off again. They start without leadership. And do you know it's the same in Christianity so often? If you don't have good leadership, the church or the Christians tend to drift a little bit without some leadership. That's why we're getting Han on board, to get better leadership in the future. But the idea is that all throughout history, even Christians, we need people to remind us and to tell us and to guide us. And each time a leader sort of passed away, they would devolve down again, so many of them. Then we move on to verses 2 and 3. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Sisera, the commander of his army, was based in Harosheth Hagoyim, because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron. Now, just to say that they're like, if you've got a whole lot of foot soldiers, you've got these massive tanks. In those days, to have chariots, especially ones with iron, made you invincible. If you got the other soldiers down on the plains, not up in the hills, but on the plains, you were unbeatable. So because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron, this is the beginning of the Iron Age in that area, and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, they cried to the Lord for help. Do you see the cycle? They sinned, they suffer, they go forward in supplication to the Lord. But think about it. Bad choices in the lives of God's people, Israel, led to 20 years of misery. 20 years of being buffeted and mistreated and having people come in and steal your crops and all things going wrong. Bad choices led to just their lives weren't as full and as joyous and as blessed as they could have been. It says in 2 Timothy chapter 2:19, it says this, everyone, this is part of the verse, who confesses the name of the Lord must turn away from wickedness. When we say, I'm a Christian, Jesus is my Lord, you say, amen. Turn away from sin. Don't continue doing what you used to do. Get out of what you used to do. That's what the Bible teaches. It's God's will that we turn our backs on what we used to do and how we used to behave and become those new creatures, creations that He's made us to be. Live what we're supposed to live and be who we're supposed to be. So if you call yourself a Christian, this is for us, and this is what they should have been doing back then as God's people. When we compromise our beliefs, when we disobey God, when we become worldly, if we get into that situation like they did, it took them 20 years to really sincerely, fully cry out, probably en masse. There was an attack here and then attack, but people then rallied and realized that we can't let this go on. And so as Christians, my suggestion to us, and I'm talking to me as well, is that when you sin, because it'll happen, we confess our sin right away. Repent right away. Turn to God straight away. I try and do it as if I've said something mean, if I see I've behaved in a way that's upset someone or something, I'm confessing in my head straight away because I don't want that to affect my fellowship with God and to bring further consequences into my life. Forsake sin. I always try and remember that turn away from my sin, confess my sin and forsake it. I often add that to my prayer. Lord, I'm so sorry for what I've done. Please help me not to do it again. I don't want to be Israel, cycle of sin. I want to break it and go forward from there. So be sure, our suffering in our lives is not always to do with something we've done. It's not necessarily a result of sin in our lives. Suffering can simply be because we live in this fallen, broken world. Things happen to us. Cars crash. I ride a mountain bike. Someone smashed my mountain bike with their car into the back of a carrier, and I lost my mountain bike, electric mountain bike. I didn't know of any sin at the time, but there it was, gone. So sometimes it's just we live in a world where people can't drive properly. And sometimes you and I can be in the center of God's will, and He'll allow some things to come into our lives to shape us and mold us and to grow us and maybe chip off a few of those rough edges in our lives. So it's not necessary to do with sin. So don't always go, oh, I must have done something hideous. I'm such a bad person. It's not what we're saying. But when you do know you've sinned, then the smartest and quickest thing you can do and the best thing you can do is turn to God, because at that moment we've opened the door to discipline. We've opened the door to discipline, depending on what it is, and it's much more nuanced than this, and it's much more to it than this. But when we sin, we open the door to God's discipline, His disappointment. He loves us. If you love your children, you discipline them. You don't say, watch whatever you like on here. Here, you like pornography, have another look. And that's not how a good parent disciplines. You say, hey, that's not good for you. And that's what God steps in and He says, look, where you're going with this, I can't let you keep going. I'm going to have to do something to sort of bring you back round. So when you and I experience some hardship or some suffering, a good question to ask is there some sin in my life? And I've prayed for people that have come to me and said, I think there's some things going on in my life. I'm doing this, X, Y, Z. Would you pray for me? And the consequences or the discipline sort of almost in the days to come lift off them, if you like. So they finally realize that, and they've just been going along and they haven't been confessing their sin, and the discipline of God's been in their lives and they need it. So ask yourself sometimes, is there something in my life that I need to confess or I need to set right? That would be I think the biblical way to face it is there something I really need to fix here with God? Have I somehow offended God? And when we confess, be sure, and this is the lovely bit about God's grace and all that Jesus did on the cross. He paid for all our sins. He will faithfully forgive our sin, and that the fellowship that has been affected by it will be restored, and we'll be back close to God and moving forward again. But that's why you want to confess. You don't lose your salvation, but it affects your relationship, your fellowship with God. So the thing is, what I like to do as well, just as an aside, and I've said this before, once I've confessed, once I ask for God to help me forsake, I also ask Him to minimize the consequences. I always say, have mercy. I really don't want to, I know I've messed up. I know I've sinned. Please, in your mercy. But anyway, enough of that. So we've had, in that text we had, they sinned, they were suffering, they made supplication to God. What's missing? What's the next thing? Salvation. That's the fourth thing. Let's read now verse 4 onwards. Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at the time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites went up to her, to have their disputes decided. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you." This is to Barak. "Go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to Kishon River, and give him into your hands." So first, this is what we're learning here. First, God disciplined his people. They realized it, and they sort of turned to God. And now we're going to see God delivering his people. Two points to the message today, very simple. God disciplined, God delivered. So I want to show you the map, because you hear about all these things, but you're not sure what's going on or where. This is all happening to the north of the country. It's happening with Naphtali and Zebulun are going to be where the armies are drawn from. They're going to fight around this area, but they're going to be drawn from there, and they're going to be fighting the Canaanite armies in that region down on the flatter area. So just in your minds, just remember that, this battle will happen here, and then Gideon might be in another area, and then someone else in another area. So it varies. Gideon will be further south by a long way, and we'll be studying him next. So just remember, these are local battles. It's not the whole nation at one time. So a person in each area is picked. For example, Ehud fought the Moabites. Othniel fought the Arameans. And Shamgar fought the Philistines. So they're all different groups in different parts. So in our story, Jabin was the king of the Canaanites, and he was oppressing Israel. Sisera was the command of the Canaanite army. So it's Jabin, and then he had his general, his 5-star general, his commander of his troops, and his name was Sisera. Remember that name. He becomes the most important opposition figure. And then you've got Deborah on the other side. So you've got them on one side, the Canaanites, and on the other side you've got Deborah, who's leading through. She's the spokesperson for God. She's the prophetess. So people would come to hear what God thinks of a situation. What's God's will on this? What's God's what are we supposed to understand? And she would be there under her palm and share from God her prophetic insight. And that's what her job was. And then the other person that's with her, obviously, is Barak. And she directs him to gather an army, 10,000 troops, to engage the Canaanites. So you need to be clear. Barak is the person that God calls to be the savior, the judge. But Deborah is the person who, you're going to see in a moment why, she becomes the dominant character, if you like, the more important one. Barak is in Hebrews, in chapter 11, in the hall of faith. He's there, not Deborah, because he was the appointed judge. So he's there with a whole bunch of other people that God used in that way. He's the one that went to battle. Deborah never went to battle. She went, we're going to find, I won't get ahead of myself, but she never went to battle. He was sent in as the general. Okay, so I want you to notice quickly, first God puts the personnel in place. He says, I want Barak to be leading. Then he tells them the plan. This is what I'm going to do. And he mentions a river, and he mentions how he's going to do it. And he says, this is what's going to take place. And then he makes a promise. I'm going to deliver the Canaanites into Barak's hand. That's what we're going to do. In other words, you're going to win, Barak. You're going to win this battle. So, all sweet. God's given the plan. He's told them what he's going to do. He's made a promise they're going to win. So everything's all right. Let's go. Let's go. Let's see what happens. Is it all going to go that way? Not so fast. Let's see what happens. Let's see what took place. Judges 4:8. Barak said to her, if you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go. You see this? What seems to be happening here is he's had this amazing calling of God, but he lacks faith. His faith is shaky, and he just says, look, Deborah, I don't know if he called her Debbie, but look, Debs, I ain't going nowhere if you're not coming. If you don't come, I'm staying right here. In fact, I'm going home. I'm not playing unless you come with me. So it's an interesting, what's going on here? What's the dynamic? Well, he resists God's will, which, again, I encourage you never to do that. He's what we can call the reluctant general. Why did he want Deborah to go? Well, maybe she's his insurance. He thinks, if I've got the prophetess with me, then surely God will be with me and it'll be okay. If I leave her behind, I go off, God might not be with me. Bad theology, bad thinking, but that might be what he's thinking. Or maybe he's thinking, if I have the prophetess who everyone sort of looks up to, then maybe these 10,000 troops will follow me better and we'll go into war a bit better. I don't know what was going through his mind, but I do know that Deborah says, all good, I'm coming with you, not a problem. But she says, I've got some bad news for you, buddy. So your lack of faith is going to have some consequences, as it does for us. Chapter 4, verse 9 and 10 say this. Certainly I will go with you, said Deborah, but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours. For the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. Then Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 men went up under his command. Deborah also went up with him. What's the bad news? He said, well, God's promised to give you victory over the army, but the other general, he's one general, Barak, versus Sisera as the two generals planning, going up against each other. He said, the privilege of taking out the other general, of being seen to be the victorious person in this and being the human that sort of comes out on top will not be yours. Your faith, or lack of it, is now going to rob him of some of his joy, some of the feel of the victory. Is going to be tinged now. I'm sure he's going to be glad to win, but there's going to be bits that he's going to be robbed of some of those things because of his lack of faith. And so that's something to sort of work through in our own minds, in our own lives, about trusting God and stepping out in faith and listening to him. First time is best. God, the divine warrior, subdued or routed the Canaanites. Now, the interesting thing is, and I'm not going to read it all, another half an hour. I mean, we're all going to be here for 2 or 3. I'm not reading that, but it basically says that God, leads them to victory, subdues them. But it never tells what part God played. Did he send snipers? Did he, bring in rockets? Did he fly planes? What did God do to give Israel the victory? Well, it's not in chapter 4, but it is hinted at in chapter 5. Chapter 5, can I just tell you how it works? You get the story of Barak and Deborah in chapter 4. And that's what you go and you study and you work through as we're doing. In chapter 5, you get a song. It's called Deborah's Song. And in that, it's a poetic form. So this is prose. This is the story. This is the one you bank your life on. And then this gives you another view through a real poetic thing that they would have sung. How I was starting to play guitar. I don't know, they wouldn't have been playing guitar, but they would have been playing something, and they would have sung these songs, tambourines and all that sort of thing. So let's have a look what it says in verse 1 and verse 21. Oop, have I gone too far? Where am I? There we go. Oh, what did I miss? The Lord routed. There we go. Did I read that? I'm sure I did. Let's move on. Judges 4, verse 1. On that day, on the day of victory, Deborah and Barak, son of Abinoam, sang this song. And you get down to verse 21, it says, the river Kishon swept them away, the age-old river, the river Kishon. March on, my soul, be strong. What? How? That seems to be the way God intervened. He made reference to it in chapter 4. It seems that probably there was just a huge deluge of rain as they were setting up. Everything turned to mud and muck. The river overflowed its banks. And now, where the chariots were going to be going and charging towards the army of the Israelites and having a field day just running over them and wiping them out, now these chariots go on mud and they start bogging down. And now the secret weapon, or the not so secret, the amazing weapon of the Canaanites is stuck in the mud. And they're all having to hop out and hop on their feet and start running and charging away, including their leader, Sisera, as we'll see. So when you lose your major weapon that you've built your whole plan of attack around, and that's wiped out, now you're exposed, you're not ready for what's coming, and they all start to flee on foot. So God intervened probably in that amazing way. Now, after the army is defeated, General Sisera is still on the loose, but not for long. Let me read you this. It's a tremendous sort of climax to the story. Here we go. Verse 17, Sisera, meanwhile, fled on foot. So you can see his fancy chariots bogged down. He probably had the pretty one with the general's stars on the side or whatever. He fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there was an alliance between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the family of Heber the Kenite. So he's made his way to a safe place nearby. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. "I'm thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." She opened a skin of milk, ancient milk bottle, gave him a drink, and covered him up. He says to her, "Stand in the doorway of the tent. If someone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone there?' say no." Now, how relieved. You're running. By this stage, his army is wiped out. They've been chased down by the Israelite army, by Barak, and they're wiped out. He has taken off in a different direction. He finds a place where he's safe, and he rushes in there. So just see that picture. He must have been so relieved to reach the tents, probably a bunch of tents, and I've been to Israel last year, and it was amazing to see how the Bedouins still lived in tents, even now. Up the little valleys beside the motorway, as you were driving, you'd see them in their black tents, and sometimes ramshackle places where they squatted with corrugated iron and stuff. But there are people still today that live around the Middle East in tents. And so he flees to this little tent city, I suppose, of some kind, and he gets there and he feels so relieved because the wife of the guy he's got the alliance with says, "Come on in." And she sort of takes control and she says, "Come in," and she offers him a safe place. She invites him in, and she even, in the thing, covers him with a blanket. So she invites him in, and then she tucks him in. "Come on in, buddy. All good. You're going to be good with me." He asks for water. She gives him milk. Did you notice that little detail? They often say milk makes you more sleepy. So here comes this exhausted man off the field, comes in, and he says, "Can I have some water?" She says, "Yeah, I'll get you water." Gives him a whole bunch of milk. "Ah, thank you so much." Gets super sleepy, tucks him in. All good. This resourceful woman is helping this man, bringing him through, it seems. He's at complete ease. He says, "Watch the door. Please watch the door for me while I just take a rest. I'm done." So he lies back. Now, this heartwarming scene is followed with this. But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went, this is Judges, and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. He must have been lying on his side. Boom. Just then, Barak came by in pursuit of Sisera, and Jael went out to meet him. I love this. This woman is just classic. Hey, Barak, come here, mate. I will show you the man that you're looking for. Now, Barak's probably, where is he? Where is he? Comes with his sword. He says, "I'll take him." Where is he? Cowering in some tent. He comes along. "I'm going to be the hero. God was wrong." So he went in with her, and there lay Sisera with a tent peg through his temple, dead. You can just imagine him. Just a big silence. End of story. That's the end of the story. Just he stands there. What had happened? God was true to his word. He gave them the victory, but he gave the honor of taking out Sisera to a woman. A lot of people, when they read this for the first time, think Deborah is going to do something and she's going to be the woman. But it's actually, God sets up someone else and she takes care of it. The honor of killing Sisera was Jael's, and she really nailed it. Just preparing you for Han, that's the sort of thing he'll do. So in the end, I had a huge section here. I was going to talk about the ethics of what Jael did, but we're not going to today. Some other time, but if you want to talk about that sometime, come and see me. But I'm going to cut that out because we've gone through our time. Who was the hero in the end? Was it Barak? Was it Deborah? Or was it Jael? Well, the answer, of course, is none of the above. These are the last two verses of chapter 4. On that day, God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites, and the hand of the Israelites pressed harder and harder against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they destroyed him. God won the victory. He enabled his people to carry on and win the war. But it was all down to God. So in the end, who's the hero? God. It's always God. God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites. Whatever commendable roles humans play, they are always minor roles compared to what God does. God is always here. Remember that in your own story. Who's the hero of my story? When I win a football game, when I create the perfect flower display, God is the hero of the story. Because without the money, you couldn't buy the flowers. Without this, or you wouldn't have a garden, or la la la. God is always ultimately the hero of the story. And that's something we must never forget. When we think about the salvation and Judges and all these people and God stepping in and rescuing, think about your own life and think about your salvation and the fact that if God hadn't stepped in, then our sin could never be forgiven. If Jesus hadn't stepped up and given his life for us, if he hadn't become a human being and walked among us, lived the perfect life, died on the cross and then resurrected again, if he hadn't done that, then we could never be saved. The greatest rescue act in the entire universe is not found in Judges and in the rescuing by Barak or anyone else. It's found at the cross of Jesus Christ, where he saves anyone who'll put their faith in him. We need to trust him. So, how do we finish this? With just a handful of things, just very short. Firstly, when Israel cried out to God, do you think at any stage they thought God is going to rescue us by sending rain, providing mud, making some chariots immobile, getting a woman called Jael, who was an ally of the king, to turn against him and put a tent peg through his head? Do you think they ever thought that? They never thought that. So, Christian, I want to finish with this. When you pray, when you cry out to God, don't just think it or imagine that, my challenge is too big. I don't know what God can do. Life is so hard. I can't figure how God could work. God can work in ways that we cannot imagine. You just have to throw yourself before him, pray to him, and ask God to intervene, and he can do beyond what you can ask or even imagine. God can work in our lives and do incredible things. No one imagined what would happen that day. No one could have pre-written that story. And in our lives, and the story of our lives, are we staying close to God? Are we confessing our sin? Are we praying to him when we face challenges, when we face difficulties, whether they're economic, whether they're spiritual, whatever they are, physical? Are we just going to him, pouring our hearts out to him, and recognizing that he is an infinite God that can do infinitely more than we can imagine in amazing ways? We need to go with that attitude and pray with confidence. Are you someone that prays with confidence? Because your God can save like no other. Let's pray.